How does a man disappear from a maximum security cell, leaving behind nothing but a pin-up poster and a pile of worn-out rocks? This is the story of Andy Dufresne, the innocent man who fought the system by outweighing it. His name is Andy. As an assistant bank manager, he is a successful middle-aged man with a good income. However, at the present time, he finds himself in court on charges of shooting and killing both his wife and her lover after discovering her infidelity. In court, Andy testifies that as soon as he found out about the affair, he was so consumed by rage that he considered killing them both, but ultimately did not. Instead, he threw his gun into the river and returned home. However, no gun was found in the river he described, and because there were witnesses who saw Andy go to his wife's lover's house, he was found guilty. For killing 2 people, the judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences. This means that even if he were released on parole once, he would still have to serve another life term in prison. In Shawshank Prison, where Andy is sent, there is an inmate named Red who is also serving a life sentence. Every 10 years, prisoners have the opportunity to have a hearing for parole. Since Red has served 20 years, he receives a second hearing for his release. He too entered prison for murder and pleads that he regrets his crime and is ready to reintegrate into society, but his parole is rejected. Because it seems natural for every prisoner's parole to be rejected, Red does not feel discouraged. Red is known as the man who can find whatever the inmates want, so his business is good and he is even called the department store of the prison. He is someone every prisoner interacts with because he can smuggle in anything from cigarettes and marijuana to alcohol. On the day of his 20th anniversary in prison, new prisoners arrive, including Andy. The first night spent in prison is the worst night for prisoners, the night where hopes die. On that night, because there are people crying, Red's group places bets on who will be the first new fish to break down. A member of the group named Haywood bets that a fat man will cry first. Red, having his eye on Andy, bets that the tall man with the nice clothes and superior air will be the first to cry. Since it is in prison, the stakes are cigarettes, not money. Warden Norton tells the new prisoners the primary rule of the prison. Since the warden is a religious man, blasphemy is the greatest violation of rules in his prison. He says the other rules are not as significant, and they will learn them by living there. With that, the guards spray the prisoners with water and disinfectant and march them into their respective cells. That night, the old prisoners taunt the new ones to make them cry. The fat man Haywood bet on begins to cry, so Haywood wins. The fat man doesn't just cry, he screams to be let out, so the captain of the guards, Hadley, enters. Hadley drags the screaming man out and beats him nearly to death. Only after the fat man stops moving does Hadley tell them to take him to the infirmary and leaves. As for Red, he loses his bet because Andy doesn't cry or make a single sound. During mealtime the next day, a maggot appears in Andy's food. An old man nearby sees this and asks Andy to give him the maggot if he isn't going to eat it. The old man's name is Brooks, and he is the oldest prisoner in the prison. He takes the maggot to feed a baby crow he found that had fallen from its nest. Haywood is busy collecting his cigarettes for winning. He asks the inmate in charge of the infirmary about the condition of the fat man who helped him win to give him a cigarette. However, the fat man died at the hands of Hadley. Since it was night, the doctor had gone home, and because the head injury was severe, the inmates who could do nothing simply sat and watched him die. Andy stays in prison without mixing with any group, remaining by himself. His neat appearance and the fact that he speaks to no one makes him someone the other prisoners dislike. There is also a group of sisters, homosexual predators, who have their eyes on Andy, so he has to avoid falling into their hands. After about a month, Andy speaks for the first time to Red, the department store of the prison. Upon seeing Andy, Red jokingly calls him the banker who killed his wife and asks why he did it. When Andy replies that he didn't do it, Red and the other prisoners mockingly say they aren't guilty either and are only there because of a bad lawyer. Because all prisoners pretend to be innocent, Red assumes Andy is doing the same. Andy spoke to Red because there was something he wanted from the prison's department store. When he says he wants a rock hammer, Red, thinking it is a lethal weapon despite the name, becomes afraid to get it. Andy explains that a rock hammer is just a small tool used for shaping stones. He wants to buy it because he is bored in prison and wants to carve stone sculptures as a hobby. Red, however, cannot believe this, and, knowing the sisters are stalking Andy, asks if he's going to use it for them or to tunnel out of the prison. Andy just laughs and says Red will know when he sees the rock hammer. Red decides to find what Andy wants, charging 20% more than the usual price. He warns Andy that if the guards find it, the item will be confiscated and he will be punished. If he reveals who sold it to him during that punishment, Red will never do business with him again. Andy accepts and walks away calmly. Because of the way he walks around prison as if he has no worries, like a man in a park, others might dislike him, but Red notices Andy because of that very demeanor. Red uses his connections to smuggle in the requested item. The rate paid for these connections is also cigarettes. Seeing that the rock hammer is as small as Andy said, Red remarks to himself that it would take 600 years to break out of prison with it. Brooks, the old man who raises the crow, is the prison librarian. While he is distributing books to the prisoners, Red puts the ordered item in for Andy. Not long after Andy's arrival in prison, the sisters make their move on the day Andy is on laundry duty. Although Andy always fights back, he emerges every time covered in wounds. This goes on for over 2 years in prison, with Andy's daily routine involving resisting the attacks of these men. When spring arrives, the authorities announce they need 12 volunteers to repair the outdoor roof plates. Because it is a job that gets them outside, over 100 prisoners submit their names. When the lots are drawn, only Red's men win, and Andy is among them. Andy's group applies tar to the roof. Hadley, the captain of the guards, has received a substantial inheritance from his wealthy oilman brother's death, but is frustrated about the taxes he must pay on it. If he could keep all the money, he could be rich, but after taxes are deducted, he would only have enough for a car. Hearing this, Andy, the former bank manager, goes to tell him there is a way to avoid the taxes. At first, Hadley doesn't trust the banker who killed his wife and tries to throw him off the roof by his neck. However, Andy clearly explains that according to the law, if the money is framed as a gift for Hadley's wife, it is tax-exempt. Andy says he can help with the necessary paperwork. In exchange for this help, Andy makes a deal for his group to each receive 3 bottles of beer. While the whole group stares at Andy in amazement, Hadley provides the beer. Because of him, a group of Shawshank prisoners gets to drink cold, ice-cold beer, provided by their worst guard, on a tar-covered roof. Andy doesn't drink a single drop himself, he just sits in the shade and smiles at the whole group. After that, Andy and Red become friends. Andy asks Red to buy a chess set so they can play. Andy says he will make the pieces himself out of quartz on one side and alabaster on the other. Red tells him it will take years to be able to play. But for the two of them, both serving life, years are what they have most of. What they lack is stone, so Andy asks him to find stone pieces. Later, while Andy is making the chess pieces, he carves his name into the wall as is prison tradition. The prisoners constantly watch the same single movie featuring the famous 90s actress Rita Hayworth in black and white. While watching, Andy goes to Red, the man who knows how to get things, and asks for Rita Hayworth. To this day, the group of sisters has not left Andy alone and comes after him whenever they feel like it. Andy continues to fight and get beaten, and this time because Andy says something that cuts deep, the sisters' leader Boggs becomes enraged and beats Andy's entire body relentlessly. Because of this, Andy spends a month in the hospital, and Boggs is sentenced to a week in solitary confinement. When Boggs returns from solitary, Hadley, who has benefited greatly from Andy, takes his own revenge on Boggs. Boggs is left paralyzed from the waist down and is sent to a northern hospital as an emergency, where he lives for about a month on a feeding tube. Red's group, out of respect for Andy, gathers the stones he wants to welcome him back when he is discharged from the hospital. When Andy returns, they give him the stones he must carve tirelessly and a Rita Hayworth poster. When the warden conducts a surprise inspection of the cells, the shrewd Andy is found reading the Bible, which the religious warden likes. Although he sees the smuggled poster and stones in the cell, he lets Andy go because Andy can quote some verses from the Bible from memory. Afterwards, Warden Norton stops assigning Andy to hard labor and gives him the job of the library. Andy becomes the assistant to the librarian Brooks, something that hadn't happened in Brooks' 50 years in prison. In reality, the warden keeps him close so he can use him when needed, and soon a guard with Hadley's rank comes to Andy. Andy helps him excellently, making him an important figure in the prison. Andy wants to ask the warden for funds to expand the library. Brooks says he has seen 6 wardens in his 50 years, and not one has ever given funds. Just as he said, prison funds are used for only 3 things: repairing walls, repairing cells, and adding wings. However, because they can ask by submitting a letter to the state legislature, Andy asks for permission to send 1 letter a week. The warden gives permission since it isn't his money. Though he sends a letter every week, the legislature ignores him for years. By the end of the year, Andy's job is to calculate and solve the tax issues for every guard. Because the tax work is so heavy, he is even allowed an assistant, and that person is Red. Red is happy doing this work because he gets to live comfortably and eat well for 1 month out of the year. To this day, Andy continues to send letters to the legislature. One day, the librarian Brooks tries to kill Haywood by holding a knife to his throat, and Andy and Red desperately pull him away. It turns out Brooks was attacking Haywood because Haywood came to say goodbye to Brooks, who was being paroled. Brooks has been in prison for 50 years, so he is afraid to return to the outside world. Having become adjusted to being an important person in the prison library, Brooks will be a useless old man who knows how to do nothing if he goes out on parole. Red says that at first, these prison walls are hateful, but after a certain amount of time, you get used to them and they swallow you up. Sentencing someone to life means taking their whole life in this way. Brooks releases the crow he raised and inevitably has to leave the prison. In his whole life before prison, he had only seen 1 car, but 50 years later, cars are running everywhere. Brooks, who is not adjusted to the changes of the outside world, lives in halfway housing, and the government gives him a job bagging groceries in a store. This job is very difficult for a shaky old man. Because he has nightmares every night, he often wakes up startled. Sometimes he frequently has thoughts of wanting to return to prison by robbing the store with a gun and even shooting the manager. However, because his age has surpassed the point of being able to do such things, Brooks decides to give up on this life. In the room where he lives in the halfway house, he writes, "Brooks was here," and ends his life. Before dying, he said goodbye to Red and the others in prison with a letter. He even apologized to Haywood for holding the knife to him. Everyone has nothing to say, but Red mutters that he should have died here. After Andy has sent letters to the legislature for 6 years, the legislature finally sends some funds as well as old books. They sent them as a way to appease him so he would stop sending letters and not bother them anymore. But Andy decides to send 2 letters a week from now on. Among the items sent by the library is a record. Andy's musical side awakens, and he puts on the record. He locks the door so the guards can't get in and broadcasts the sound from the broadcast room so the whole prison can hear. He just sits peacefully in the room. Prisoners everywhere are amazed by the music they haven't heard before. Though not one of them understands the song sung by 2 Italian women, for that moment, everyone in Shawshank feels free. Even when the warden arrives, Andy, who remains calm and continues listening, is sentenced to 2 weeks in solitary confinement. After that, because Red has served 30 years in prison, he has another hearing for parole. Just like before, Red, who is always rejected despite saying he regrets his crime and is ready to reintegrate, is rejected again. For Andy, today marks his 10th anniversary in prison. Later, because Andy asked so much for funds, the legislature decides to give $500 a year for the library. 4 years later, Andy has transformed the smelly room into the best library in England. Warden Norton is also making preparations to use the prisoners in state projects outside the prison at a cheap rate. Using the excuse that he wants the prisoners to understand the essence of living blamelessly, he uses the prisoners as cheap labor for state projects and also takes bribes for outside projects. The person who controls the money behind these secret deals is Andy. Because Andy is handling illegal money flows that people like Red can't even imagine, a single mistake would end the lives of both him and the warden. Red is worried because whether it is from the bank or the police, a small lead would end everything, but Andy has already handled those matters. Andy has created a person named Randall Stevens who doesn't actually exist. That person has everything from a birth certificate to an ID, a driver's license, and bank accounts. The only thing that doesn't exist is the person himself. Andy, who is expert in paperwork matters, created a person who legally exists with the warden's help. Even if the police find out about their under-the-table dealings, the person involved wouldn't be the warden or Andy, but the police would end up searching for a ghost by looking for the bank account owner, Randall Stevens. Andy was an honest man when he was outside, but he seems to have learned tricks since entering prison. Red just praises him, saying he is brilliant. Andy manages the warden's profits, manages the library, and even helps the prisoners get their high school diplomas. One day, new prisoners arrive again. Among them is a thief named Tommy. He is a 2-year veteran of prison for theft and burglary, and because he is young and lively, he becomes part of Red's group. Because he has been to many prisons for stealing, Andy advises him to try a different line of work instead of being an unskilled thief. Afterwards, Tommy tells Andy that he has a wife and a newborn baby. He wants to pass high school while in prison. But because he can't even get the ABDEV right, Andy has to teach Tommy like a primary school student. Because Tommy tries very hard, Andy, who is teaching him, also feels proud. One day, Tommy happens to talk with Red and finds out that Andy is the bank manager who came to prison for killing his wife and her lover. In the previous prison where Tommy was held, his cellmate, a murderer, used to talk incessantly about the jobs he had done and the people he had killed while in prison. That cellmate used to watch the behavior of the bosses in the club and would break into their houses if he thought there was a lot of money. One day, the target he chose was the lover of a bank manager's wife. He broke into the house and got caught, so Tommy's cellmate shot and killed them both. But the court sentenced the wife's legal husband, the bank manager, for the murder, which the cellmate used to tell as a joke. Hearing Tommy's story and knowing the real culprit, Andy goes to tell the warden immediately. If Warden Norton would grant him a new trial, Andy would be free, but because the warden cannot let go of Andy, who created a river of illegal money for him, he refuses, saying it is impossible. Andy becomes angry and speaks sharply to the warden. Because of his words, the warden becomes angry and puts Andy in solitary for a month. A month is the longest punishment Red has heard of in his whole prison life. Red's group is also amazed to find out that Andy has been in prison for 19 years without actually being guilty. That same day, Tommy's high school exam results arrive, and he passes every subject with a C+. Andy hears that news from the guard who brings the food. This is the happiest moment for Andy during his time in solitary. One night, the warden meets Tommy at a place outside the prison. When the warden asks if he would testify if an appeal was filed regarding Andy's innocence, the foolish Tommy says he would do so gladly. To keep him quiet since Andy would be exonerated if Tommy actually testified, Hadley shoots and kills Tommy with a gun. They spread the news that a prisoner tried to escape and was shot, but Red and the others know the truth. Andy, who was in solitary, also knows about it and tells the warden he can no longer lie for him. The warden threatens that if he doesn't do it, he will put Andy with the sisters and burn the library. He tells Andy to take another month to think about it and keeps him in for another month. Upon being released, Andy, who has no choice, returns to doing his work as usual. Andy tells Red the place he will go if he gets out of prison. He wants to live in a small Mexican coastal town called Zihuatanejo. It is a small town on the Pacific coast, and they say there are no memories there. Andy wants to live out the rest of his life without thinking about everything that has happened. He tells Red to come to him when he gets out, but Red is someone who doesn't even think about surviving in the outside world. He tells Andy that he is someone in prison, but that won't be the case outside. Andy asks Red to do one thing for him if he gets out. There is a large hayfield in Buxton with a stone wall, and next to it is a large oak tree. Andy says he has buried something he wants to give to Red under that oak tree. Because his words are strange and abnormal, everyone is worried that something will happen to Andy. Haywood thinks that because Andy came and asked for a 6-foot-long rope, he might do what Brooks did. The warden, as usual, has Andy work on the thief accounts and then puts the ledgers in the safe and leaves. He has Andy shine his shoes as he always does, and Andy shines them. That night, as thunder rolls and lightning strikes, it is the longest night for Red, who is worried about Andy. The next morning, when the cells are checked, Andy does not come out of his cell, so the guards go in to look. Andy is not in the cell, and because there isn't a single trace or footprint in the whole room, everyone is amazed. They start by questioning Red, who is closest to Andy, but even Red knows nothing. The warden, becoming angry, throws a rock at the wall, and it goes through the poster on the wall. Looking behind the poster, they see a tunnel and realize Andy has escaped from prison. They search everywhere but find only the dirty prison uniform, a bar of soap, and the very worn-out rock hammer. Red thought it would take 600 years with the rock hammer, but Andy dug through the prison wall in 20 years. Andy got the idea to escape when the old wall crumbled while he was carving his name into it. He had been digging since that day and had kept it carefully hidden with posters. He carried out the rock fragments in his pants whenever he had permission to go outside. After Tommy's death, he decided he had been in prison long enough and escaped. He wore the warden's shoes after shining them without the warden knowing. He left his own worn-out shoes for the warden. The place where he hid the rock hammer was inside the Bible. He took all the ledgers he had prepared for the warden, replaced them with fakes, and tied his belongings to his leg with a rope. Reaching the outside of the prison wall, he broke the 500-foot-long sewage pipe in synchronization with the sound of thunder. 500 feet is the length of 5 football fields, but Andy crawled through the filth until he reached freedom. Afterwards, Andy goes to the bank as the fictional Randall Stevens he created and withdraws all the money he searched for on behalf of Warden Norton. He had searched for it for 19 years on behalf of Norton, but it all became his. At the same time, he sent the evidence of Tommy's murder to the police. Hadley, who pulled the trigger along with Warden Norton who gave the order, will go to prison. While Hadley is arrested in tears, Norton ends his own life. Afterwards, Andy sends a postcard to Red with his location via a postage stamp. Just as he said, Andy is currently heading for the Pacific Coast in a convertible. Red's group in prison tells stories about Andy every day, starting with the story about getting the beer. They even feel bad that he left. Later, because Red has served 40 years in prison, he has another hearing for parole. The Red, who always answered the same way and never got out, doesn't answer patiently this time. When asked if he regrets it, he replies that there isn't a day in prison he doesn't regret. He says he wants to go and tell the young man he was not to do these things, but those times are gone, so he tells them not to waste his time and to just quickly stamp the rejection since he is just living peacefully in prison. Because of his words, the parole board grants his release. After getting out, he lives in the same halfway house where Brooks lived. He has to work just like Brooks and feels the same things Brooks felt. Like Brooks, he considers ending his own life, but to keep the promise he made to Andy, he heads for Buxton. People out on parole are watched, but the elderly Red arrives smoothly at the place Andy described, the hayfield in Buxton with the stone wall and the large oak tree. Digging at the base of the tree, he finds a letter and some money. Andy told him to have hope for life and to come to him. Red also heads for Zihuatanejo on the Pacific coast. On the beach, Andy, full of hope, greets his old friend Red with a smile.